All right, everybody, welcome to the Node.js meetup. This is a super special meetup because we do this once per year. This is the second annual Front-End Framework Showdown. It's still JavaScript. We often use Node in the backend for that. That works, right? As always, this is being streamed out, so with that, it's a recording. We'll have it on YouTube afterwards, so if you miss any details and you want to go back and watch it again, we'll have links out to you on the meetup page, but we'll also tweet that out and anything else that you want to have. So before we begin, some basic thank yous. First of all, I want to thank Code Talent. They provided the space for us. They also provided the large cabinet of beer. I don't think there's anybody from Code Talent here, right? No, they all left early today. And we have pizza provided to us graciously by Google. So we can thank them. So before we get into the night, are there any announcements?
Denver Startup Week.
Denver Startup Week is coming up.
Monday, if you're interested in blockchain, there's a whole blockchain event from noon to 7 with a party, and we'll be giving away a little bit of crypto, a little bit of Bitcoin for drinks and things, so come on by. It's 28th and Walnut at a place called Booze Hall.
All right. And I think you had a...
I did. You're going to hear all kinds of shit from me in just a second. But before all that starts, who's been to Develop Denver before? Some people? Good time? Woo! More. Anyway, so I run a conference called Develop Denver. This is the 7th year we're doing it. It is in 27 days, October 18th and 19th, and it is badass. Very different than any other kind of tech conference you've been to. Covers the range from engineering management, front-end development, back-end development, design, a little bit of everything. It has a very kind of rogue spirit, even after all these years. So if you're interested in submitting a talk, you've got 2 more days to do that. developdenver.org, tickets are on sale, speakers are going to start getting announced on Monday, I believe. All kinds of cool shit going on. Develop Denver, Develop Denver, Develop Denver. Woo! Yeah!
All right, so let's begin getting the night on with. So we have a few new frameworks to show you, and one sort of rehash from last year. So to begin off, we'll be beginning with Kyle with Vue.js. Then we'll be moving on to CJ with React, and then I'll be showing off Mavo, which my guess is nobody here has heard of Mavo.
I read up on it today.
You read up on it. All right, Kim.
For those of us who weren't here last year, what's this all about?
All right, excellent question. So Kim asked, what is all this about? So basically, we as back-end developers who sometimes dabble in a front end because often we're full stack, we like to know what options are out there. And as we may have noticed, there are a few front-end frameworks. And how do we choose which front-end frameworks to use? Well, we have showdowns. Now, some of us may go on and show them off a lot, like CJ is a proponent for Vue a lot. Kyle has been known to tout Ember in the past.
Once or twice.
But what we really want to do here is we want to build the same app, and it's a simple application, which Kyle can show what it is, and rebuild it the same way with 3 different frameworks to show, at its basics, what is this framework all about. And at the very least, we hope that you'll be entertained by the difference in the frameworks, but maybe also come away knowing a little bit more about what framework to choose for either your work project or your personal hobby project. Or maybe what framework to just run away from and never, ever, ever use in the future. So before we begin, any questions? Going once, going twice. All right. We're gonna not take any more questions about the frameworks until the very end. Kyle's unfortunately gonna have to run off to a concert. But
they don't go on stage till like 10 o'clock. I'll get drunk and talk shit with you guys all night.
okay, well never mind. He'll be here for questions. Kyle, come on.
All right! Hi, everybody! Come on. Can't even do this right. Other ear? That's, oh yeah, it is like handled. Oh, that's much better. All right, what up, buttholes? So, call back. So, I'm going to be demonstrating Vue.js for you guys tonight, and just tell you a little bit about this app that we're all building. It's called Barkwire. Barkwire is a dating app for dogs. Those of you who were at Frontend Face-Off last year, it's the exact same app. But we're going to hopefully put a new spin on it, show you some new things, and hopefully highlight the differences between some of the frameworks out there today. So I'm going to give myself a little timer so I don't go too damn long. And just fair warning, CJ live codes for a living, and I haven't done it since Galvanize, so minus your expectations of me by about 10. Okay, cool. So one of the things that's kind of neat about Vue is that it has a lot of really cool build tooling around it. So for example, if I do something like Vue create Barkwire, I get all these options for how I can build the app. This is things like all that Webpack config bullshit that really doesn't have anything to do with your app or like how you provide the value. It's all plumbing, right? So we get an opportunity to have all that stuff kind of pre-wired for us. So I'm going to manually select that I want Babel, I want to use the router, I want to use Vuex, I want to use CSS preprocessor, I don't care about the linter, and we're going to do a little bit of testing also. We're going to TDD this. And then I can say, oh, for my CSS preprocessor, I want to use Sass, I want to use Cypress for testing, this is how I want my config set up, and I don't want to save that as a preset. So while this is all installing, as Brooks mentioned, I ran the Ember meetup for 3 years. I represented Ember here last year. I love Ember. I still love Ember. They were right about everything and still are. However, I also like being employed. So I picked up Vue.js, and it's those of you who are from like a more React-y kind of component-based background will recognize that it's a very similar lightweight approach to web development, but it has a lot of the kind of what I call like developer ergonomics that a more opinionated framework like Ember offers. So to get started, okay, so it did all the setup for me, and if I go into Barkwire and do npm run serve, I have a development server running for this. So the first thing that I usually do when I do like a kind of boilerplate build like this is like I go in and just delete all the boilerplate. So I go in here, like this logo, a lot of stuff that will like help you know that you got everything set up correctly. I don't want any of that. So I'm going to delete the views. Over in the main app file, I'll get rid of this kind of boilerplate nav and the boilerplate styles they give you. And one last place, the router. So get rid of all these default routes. A lot of this stuff is good. If you've never used Vue before, a lot of stuff can give you an idea of how all these different pieces fit together. And all right, so we're good to go. Next thing that I want to do is do what I call like a smoke test. Just make sure that the tests are reading the right thing, applications running, all that kind of stuff. So what I'll do is go over to the, I mentioned that I was using end-to-end tests. Let's just kind of get those wired up. Let's say this is the Barkwire app, and I'm going to say it displays the heading Barkwire. And visiting the app is a thing we're going to do pretty much every time. So let's put that in a before each hook. And say, all right, before every test that I run, I want to go to the app. And the H1 on that should read Barkwire. And I'm kind of a jerk about indentation and singles and doubles and all that kind of stuff, so I'm going to fix all that. All right, so when I want to actually run these tests, I can do npm run test e2e, and oops, got to actually be in the app, that helps. So all this stuff was wired up for me. I didn't need to specify test folders or do any of that kind of stuff. And it's going to run Cypress on this nascent app. And there's some boilerplate that kind of comes with that. But if I run the specs, I should have my first failing test. Oops, god damn it, hang on. Trying to get it to not overscan off the screen so I don't get to use all my cool window management buddies. With my test, yeah. It's letting me know. And that actually goes inside all this. I haven't had anything to drink tonight, so that was a joke, by the way. All right, there you go. There's our first failing test. Goes to the side, doesn't see anything. That's kind of what we'd expect, right? So if I go over to the app, I could say, hey, I want to have a header. And let's put Barkwire in it. And let's see if we can get that test to pass now. Hey, it passed! I got a green check mark. Love it. Yeah! Okay, cool. So our smoke test passed, pretty much good to go. And so let's do just a little bit of setup for the next feature that we want to do. And also, like I don't want you guys to have to watch us write CSS all night. So, like, we're all kind of using a shared style sheet. So if I go over to a previous version of this app and go down here and yank the styles out. Now if I run it, it should look like the beautiful Barkwire that everybody knows and loves. Down the footer, I'm going to say, give us some good legal text. This is copyright. The Barkwire Corporation. And let's write our first feature test. So for this one, I'm going to say, most important thing that Barkwire needs to do is list dogs. So I'll know that I've successfully completed this feature when, for example, it lists 3 dogs. Our test data set's going to have 3 dogs in it. And the way that I'll know that that happens is if I can get dogs li should have length 3. Cool, so that's my next failing test. And so it's spinning over there. So how am I gonna get this to pass? What I'm gonna do is hop over to the views folder that was auto-generated for me, and I'm going to make a dogs.view. This is called a single file component. It's gonna have the template, all my logic, and all my styles kind of in one place. And then I'm gonna go over to the router and tell it that the first route that I want is has the name dogs and the path /dogs, and the component that I want to use to represent that is dogs.
I'm gonna pull that in from dogs. Say at views dogs. Now, like I don't have any navigation, I can't navigate to that path. So the other thing that I want to do is say, all right, for my index, which maps to the URL slash, I want to redirect to the route dogs. So now when you hit that index route, it should redirect you to our dogs buddy. Now, this dogs view that we made that was empty, three components, or three pieces that you need in view. And the first one, the only required one, is the template. It needs to be something in there. So if I say this is a section of class dogs, and I'm going to have a list of dogs, so we'll represent that with an unordered list. And let's just make 3 empty list items. That should be enough to get this test to pass. Let's see if it does. Hey, and it does. I got another green check mark.
Green check mark. Woo!
So if we want to use the test to kind of drive the design of this application, then the next thing that would help me know that like I've actually developed it was it lists the second dog as Bilbo Wagons. So this uses array syntax, so that's the second match for that. And if I look inside of that for an H3, that should have text Bilbo Wagons. Cool. So I got another failing test. Let's hop over here and go to that second list item, and I'm going to make a section here. I'm going to call it a dog listing, and let's just give it an H3 of Bilbo Wagons, hard-code it, and see if we can get that test to pass. Oh man, I'm just lighting the world on fire. Such a good programmer. So, some other things that are going to be part of like a standard dog listing are we're going to have it's a card essentially. So we're going to have a figure in there, and inside of that figure, we're going to have an image. And we'll leave the source blank for right now. The alt text on this is just going to be something to let us know that we do have a placeholder there. There's going to be a fig caption on it that's got some kind of caption. And then right below that, we're going to have a description of the dog. It's like their dating profile. So does all that show up? Test still passed. There we go. That kind of looks like what we're shooting for on this thing. So now the next thing that like lets us get to the next piece of progress on the app is if I say, cool, well it should list the third dog as Helga Hufflepuff. So if I increment that up and say Helga Hufflepuff, well, shoot, that one's going to spin because I can copy and paste this, but at that point we're not really using component-y kind of stuff, right? So how about I extract that, this is like a repeatable thing, that's a good candidate for a component. So I'm going to hop over to the components folder that was auto-generated for me, make a dog listing.view, and I'm going to yank this out and put it right in that new component that I made. And over here in dogs, I should now be able to just say dog listing as if it were an element. But I need to tell view that like, yo, don't try to find this in JavaScript or something, I want to import it. So I'll say, hey, let's do components, dog listing, and then what this, this view essentially is something that includes the component dog listing. And if I did all that right, this test should still pass. And it does. Cool. So don't have the Helga Hufflepuff thing. That's all right. That's what we're going to do next. So to get this part of it to pass, we have an API that delivers all these dogs dynamically. And the way that Vue handles that is with a plugin called Vuex. It's a lot like MobX in React. And it's essentially like a global big pile of state manager. So what I want to do with this is say, the only state that I care about in this app right now is dogs. The way that I'm going to add dogs to that is I'm going to make a mutation called update dogs. And that takes state in, and I'll say state.dogs equals the dogs that I passed in. And the way that my app is going to be able to access that is through this action. So we'll say something like fetch dogs. To fetch dogs, so I'm going to use Axios on this. I love fetch, and I love using native features and that kind of shit. I would highly recommend using Axios regardless in a Vue app, because things like the interceptors and stuff really help with testing a lot. So we're actually going to use Axios for the actual fetch call. So we'll import Axios. And we'll say, and I want to use async await on this. We'll say async. We'll destructure the response and say axios.get. The base URL for all this is, and CJ, correct me if I'm wrong, HTTPS barkwireapi.now.sh. Does that sound right? Right, for the actual call. So I'm going to say, let's use that base URL. /dogs. That should give me like a dynamic list of these dogs. And then all I need to do is call that mutation that I wrote. I'll commit update dogs and pass it data.dogs. So my state manager should be good to go on this. If I hop over to the dogs view that I made, what I want to do is trigger that whenever this component is created. And I'll say, hey, store, why don't you dispatch that beautiful fetch dogs method that I made. And then if I want to have access to that stuff that gets populated into the store, what I'm going to do is make a computed property and say, hey, component, if you want to access dogs, you can get it from this.store.state.dogs. Cool, so now this view should have access to a list of dogs. And if I want to use that, I should be able to say, get rid of this repetition in here. And kind of like an Angular style, uses directives in a lot of the templates. And so we can say v4, that's our like looping utility, and say for dog in dogs. And then for this component, we'll bind dog to the dog instance in that loop. So the last thing that we need to make this all pop is in that dog listing component that we made, we need to tell it to expect the dog that we're passing in. And there's kind of a neat thing that Vue does. And I think it's a good example of the kind of, like what I mean by developer ergonomics. If I say props, and I say I'm expecting a dog and it's of type object, it will do some light type checking on that for me and throw a warning if I accidentally passed in a string or something. I can also destructure all that out and have all the different aspects of that and type check all of those also. It's just like a really handy nicety. And then inside of this, instead of these static values, I'll now have access to like dog.name and dog.image URL. And since that's JavaScript, I want to bind it, and that colon is a good shorthand for that in Vue. For alt, that's going to be dog.name. And since that's dynamic, I want to bind that also. This fig caption, kind of use a handlebars style syntax. And we'll say that that's the image caption. And then in the paragraph, that's going to be dog.description. And that should be enough to get this to pass. It's not. It looks like I broke something. So the next thing I'm going to do is hop over to this and see what the heck is going on. Because doing the dog redirection correctly, one of the nice things about Cypress is I can't actually just pull open a console. Cannot read property dogs of undefined. All right, sweet. So where did I not define dogs? So v4 dogs. If anybody sees the mistake I made, feel free to shout it out.
Any Axios calls? You did anything, but not weird.
There you go. He was just waiting for me the whole time.
This dog.description not need a handle voice.
There we go, I got passing test. Ah! I'm sorry, the question was, oh, yes, it most certainly does. All right, and so if I refresh that, we should see like the actual descriptions. And there we go, that kind of looks like a dating app for dogs. All right, so I have passing tests, and there's one more feature that we want to add, and that is I should be able to click on any of these cards and see like an individual dog, and it should map to the URL. You know, like if I want to send that to a buddy of mine and be like, hey, what do you think about Charles Barkley? Pretty cool, huh? It's got to have the individual dog on it. So what we're going to do for that is write a test. So we'll say, list a dog. And for this one, I also want to do a before each on these and say, before each one of these, let's click on Bilbo Wagons, and that should take us to the page. So we're automatically reloading the page every time, but I should be able to say, dogs, li, give me the second one, and then click on it. And that should get us to that Bilbo Wagons page every time. And inside of that, I'll say it shows a single dog. And I'll know that that's done when I can do .dog listing, and should have length of 1. Cool, so do I have my next failing test? Why, yes, I do. It's spinning aimlessly. So to make that pass, I'm going to go over into views. There's a lot that's kind of in common with the dogs list, so I'm going to reuse some of that. And I'm going to copy dogs into dog.view. And over in the router, I'm going to say, hey girl, why don't you use that dog route? And we're going to map this one with a dynamic property in the path. Or pass it an ID, and then otherwise instantiate the dog component. So over in that dog component, we don't need the list anymore. And we're going to call this dog. And still need the component. But instead of, when we create this, fetching all the dogs, let's just get one of them. So we're gonna have like a fetch dog thing, and to that we're gonna pass this $route params ID. That'll get that dynamic URL property for us. And then instead of making dogs available, we're gonna make the matching dog available. And we're gonna do that by just doing a find off of the state, and we'll say dog, dog.id, soft equals this route params ID. And now we need to actually make that. So over here in this, we're just gonna copy fetch dogs and make it fetch dog. And we're gonna pass an ID into that. And instead of update dogs, I'm gonna call this one add dog. So the difference there is that I may already have this loaded. It's an SPA, right? That kind of stuff happens. So we're gonna call this add dog, and if the dog already exists, we're not gonna do anything, and if the dog doesn't exist, we're gonna add it. So to do that, we call this new dog. We're gonna say found dog equals state.dogs.find, kind of like that thing we just did. And dog.id soft equals new dog.id. So then we can say if not found dog, then state.dogs, and we'll just add the new dog. That should kind of handle our use case for that just fine. Let's see how our tests are doing. Oh, I know it's not gonna pass because I actually have to link to this new route. So over here, inside of that, I'm gonna use the view router, make a router link, and I need to tell it where to go. So I'll say, how about you go to the route that I've named dog. And that's really nice too, because if I decide to change the URL structure of all this kind of stuff, I don't need to also fuck with every place that I link to something. And then I want you to also use the params ID and dog.id. So let's see what that does. All right, that didn't work. So looks like if I actually look at the thing that we're doing and I hover over that, it's not actually linking. So next thing I would do, hey, what do you know? We got a code issue. Missing comma, fucking JavaScript. So, right there. Hey, I got a green check mark! All right, so we're short on time. We're gonna call that good on the tests. The last thing that I wanna do is actually deploy this thing. So one of the other things that's cool that comes with UCLI is I could do something like Firebase init, tell it where I want to go. I'm going to host it, and there's my Barkwire project. View public folders are called dist, and I do want to configure it as a single page app. And then I can do something like npm run build, and this gives me like my cool minified, gzipped, all that kind of like cool shit version of the app. And I can just do Firebase deploy. And that is live on the internet. And then all I have to do is add this and commit. Booyah, achieved. Ta-da! And that's Vue.js. Thank you very much. And I don't think I mentioned it at the beginning of the thing. My name is Kyle Coberly. I work for a company called Health Scholars, and I run a conference called Develop Denver, like I was just talking about earlier, and that's me. Bye.
Great job. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Check, check. Yeah, oh, let me disable Flux. Hello. 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 Can everybody hear me in the back? Yeah, cool. And hello, internet. So my name is CJ. I am CJ on NiverDev Slack. My email is cj@knoll.computer. That is a real internet address. That's my website, and I'm on GitHub as W3CJ. So, who am I? My name is CJ. I'm a full stack developer, an educator, and a maker. I've worn many hats in my career, including instructor, software engineer, QA analyst, system administrator, and help desk consultant. Worked all through the stack. And formerly, I was a lead instructor, principal full stack developer at Galvanize. But now, I'm currently seeking my next adventure, so if you have any cool opportunities, come talk to me. And in the meantime, I stream myself on YouTube. I have a channel called Coding Garden with CJ. I stream several days a week, just live coding, building apps. I do Vue.js, React, backend stuff with Node and Mongo and Postgres and Express and all kinds of things. I just got back from New York City. I was there for about 3 months doing a temporary thing at Galvanize. Has anyone here heard of Coding Train on YouTube?
Yeah.
Cool. So I actually get to do a guest spot with him while I was there. It's amazing. And so that just happened a few weeks ago. So there's a video on his channel that I did with him. I am also, ironically, the co-organizer of the Denver Vue meetup. I co-organize it with Marlena Baker. And now let's find out who all of you are. So who here develops JavaScript on a daily basis? Raise your hand. Cool. I mean, we're at the Node.js meetup, cool. Let's do like a survey of front-end frameworks. So who does Vue.js on a daily basis? Yeah. Oh, awesome, nice. What about Ember? Ember people? No, a little bit. Any Angular 1 people? Okay. Some legacy code or? No, not legacy, okay. Cool, what about Angular 2+, 4, 5, 6? Awesome. And are there actually React people here tonight? Cool, I hope I will do you proud. I'm gonna do my best. Let's do this. So what is React.js? We can see on their website, it is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. Some people kind of question, like, why is it the front-end framework Showdown? A lot of people use React on the front end. Typically, it might be considered the V in MVC or the view layer. It uses the Flux pattern, doesn't exactly use MVC, but it really is a library for building like the UI in apps. It's declarative, component-based, learn once, write everywhere. We're gonna do it tonight. And I think like one theme of working with React.js is it's just JavaScript. And we're gonna see that tonight. So tonight I'm gonna be using a lot of ES 6, 7, 8, ES Next features and like really taking advantage of the things built into JavaScript.
Cool, so let's do it. I'm gonna do a very brave thing and use the latest branch of Create React App and like the alpha branch of React scripts. All of this code is on GitHub, w3cj/react-barkwire. Actually, just real quick, we're gonna get super meta. I'm gonna pull up the Twitch stream and share this. Inception. So there's that, and then also I have my fancy to-do list. If you ever watch Coding Garden, I'm famous for making really long, really good to-do lists. Oh, and hey, Alka, welcome to the stream. Cool. Okay. Yes, let's do this. Let's create a React app. So, as I mentioned, I am going to be using the latest branch. Oh, and before I forget, let me start a stopwatch. Cool. So there's an issue on the Create React App repo right now that was opened back in January by Dan Abramov, talking about like what's next in the latest version of React scripts and Create React App. And so he talks about all the things that are going to be in there, including like Webpack 4. And he has a note. This is alpha, so you probably don't want to do this in production, but you can use it by running Create React App at next and telling it to use the latest version of scripts. So we will do that now. Oh, yeah. Gonna test the internet. So how y'all doing? Good? Yeah?
Doing good.
You having a good time? Cool.
It's almost Friday.
It's almost Friday. I didn't really plan what to do while this was happening. Twiddle my thumbs? I don't know. Cool. I can kind of do a breakdown of what we're going to do. So we're going to make the React app. I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time setting up ESLint, just because I want to have good errors in my editor. We're going to clean things up. We're going to talk about components. We're going to be using React Router version 4, and then we'll get into actually like coding on the stories as well. Okay, so it's created, and when you use Create React App, that creates a folder. Apparently, I just created it called app name, but I'm going to move that really quick. Let's call it Barkwire. We'll go into that folder and then just do yarn start. So this will start up a Webpack hot reloading auto refreshing server, and wait for this, you might not have seen this before. Yeah? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, this is if you've ever done Create React App, they used to have a different layout, like a header on top. So this is the new one. Cool. So I have a React app going. Let's kind of check it out. So, well, I guess even before we do that, let's set up ESLint. I will show you what got created here. So we get a folder, we have all of our configurations, we have our source directory with our components and the setup. But one thing I want to do is set up ESLint, so that way my editor is helping me be a better developer. So here in the Barkwire folder, we're going to add ESLint as a dependency. I am going to install ESLint plugin React, so this is going to allow ESLint to understand JSX, which I'll talk about in a second. I'm also going to be installing Babel ESLint, so that way the linter and the transpiler can kind of like work in conjunction. So as a dev dependency, I'm installing ESLint. There's a caveat, I'm installing this specific version because that's the one that is supported with this version of Create React App, so let's do that. And once that gets installed, I'll just use the CLI tool to generate an ESLint config and kind of like answer some questions for it. Cool. So, and if you're not familiar, npx is a way of running a command with something that's potentially installed in your node modules or installed globally on your machine. So in the past, you might have had to do npm install -g. Now you can just run it directly from there. So let's answer some questions. I'm going to answer questions. I am using the latest ECMAScript features. I'm using ES module, so that's like import, export syntax. We're running in a browser. We're not using CommonJS, that's like require. We are using JSX. We are using React. I prefer a 2-space tab. Single quotes, Unix. I do prefer semicolons as well, and JavaScript. Yes, I realize I just... Yeah, but the cool thing about ESLint is if you're working on a team with me, all you have to do is type one command and all of these things will kick in. It'll add semicolons, it'll convert it to a 2-space tab or whatever. Cool. So that's running and installing things. And now we need to update our ESLint RC once it gets created. Let's give it a second. Actually, I'm so used to like interacting with the chat while this is happening. I'm gonna pull up Twitch real quick. I'll leave it off to the side. Semicolons, facepalm. Cool. I am downloading at 1.7 megabytes a second. It's crazy. Almost.
What's your favorite React plugin?
None. No. I mean, and also, it's, like, one thing I do like about Vue.js is, like, it generates with an ESLint and stuff like that. And that's one thing about, like, the React ecosystem. There are a lot of different, I guess, there are other starter projects out there. Oh, no! Did it break? Okay, I have an ESLint file. I'm going to assume it worked real quick. But yeah, so Create React App is like the official one supported by React, but other people have starter projects that include Redux and other plugins and like their preferred way of laying things out. So it is, there's a lot out there that's one of maybe the not so great things about working with React, but I am doing it the official way. I'm going to show you how I set this up. So this is the ESLint file that got generated. I'm going to convert it to a 2-space tab. There are a few things that I have to add in here. I need to tell it to extend plugin React recommended, so that way it understands JSX and gets rid of errors like React is imported but not defined and stuff like that. I'm also going to set the parser to be Babel ESLint. That can just go right here. And this is a bug I ran into earlier. Like, there's a warning in the console, and it's a bug specifically with the accessibility plugin. So I'm just going to disable this rule. It has something to do with text not being in headers, but regardless, I just don't like seeing warnings in the console, so I'm going to disable that one. Okay, if everything went right, we're going to kill this and restart it. DevTools. Cool. All right, we didn't break anything. So let's what's next? Let's clean things up and take a tour of the app. So, like I said, it generated this folder. There is the source directory. Index.js is our Webpack entry point. And we can see we're bringing in the React library, we're bringing in React DOM, we're bringing in some default styles. This is, because we're using Webpack, we're actually able to import styles like this. It's importing the main app component. It comes pre-configured with a service worker that does like offline caching. And then here is where it happens. We say React DOM.render, we tell it we want to use this app component, and we tell it where we want it to live on the root element. So if we look at app.js, this is our main React component. So if you've never seen JSX before, it's essentially HTML inside of your JavaScript. So up at the top, we bring in React, we bring in component. When you're creating class-based components in React, you extend from component to get some of the built-in functionality and lifecycle methods. Because of Webpack, you're also able to import like images and things like that, so that's where that spinning logo was coming from. But let's remove all of this. So we're gonna get rid of that. We're gonna change our render function just to be like a very simple H1 that just says, hello, Node.js Denver. Cool. And now my app should literally just say, hello, Node.js Denver. There we go, cool. So I basically took everything that I was rendering out before and removed it because we're gonna add our own stuff in there. I am gonna get rid of the built-in styles because we're just gonna be using a predefined style sheet. Get ready to throw things at me. I'm gonna delete this test file. And I'm also gonna delete this index.css, mainly because I'm gonna be using a predefined style sheet, the same one that Kyle used. And then in our index.js, also remove that import of index.css. Let's also get rid of this React logo. Things are nice and basic, just the things that I want. Cool. So we've set all those up. We have a basic render function. Now let's create like a basic app layout. So this is very similar to the one you saw Kyle create. You have your header with the title. There's a main area. That's where all the app is going to live. And then you have like a footer. So I'm going to take this and put it into my render function. why is this complaining? Oh, okay, so we'll talk about why this is complaining in a second. And one thing I also need to do is bring in the styles. So I have the styles hosted on now, but the other thing I didn't show is the public folder. This is where your main HTML file lives. And if you look at index.html, it's got some basic setup, and then there's that div right there with ID root. So this is actually where your React app lives, like right on this element. But just in the head, I'm going to add that link tag so we get some basic styles. So now let's see the error. Failed to compile, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Did you want a JSX fragment? So this is one of the caveats of the render function in React is because it's JavaScript, you can only return one thing. So if you think about it, I'm basically trying to return like 3 things right now. So typically in the past, you would just like wrap this in a div and then it would be happy. And we get a basic app, cool. But in the latest version of React, there's this new thing called a React fragment. And actually, let me show what this renders. So if we actually look at the element inspector, we can see we have div ID root, then there's that parent div, and then everything else lives inside of that. But if I change this to a React fragment, now, this is basically a way of saying, I want all of these elements to kind of be like at the root of this component. And now you'll notice when it renders, they're all direct children of the divs, so they're not there. And then we can get even weirder about it. I don't think my linter supports this, but you can actually just put empty tags like that, and it works the same way. This is known as like the React fragment. I'm gonna get rid of that just because of the errors there, but that's a thing. Okay, so we have our basic layout. Now let's break this down into components. So we talked about this is our main app component, but what I want to do is I want to pull this header into a component, I want to pull this footer into a component, and then bring those things in. So in my source directory, I'll create a new folder, call it components. And in here, I'll create a new file and call it header.js. I installed some snippets today. I think it's React functional component export. Cool. So I'm going to create what's known as a stateless functional component. It's not going to be a class component like this. It's literally just a render function. It's a function that returns JSX. So the header here, I just want it to return this. And I'm going to get even weirder with it and just use like the fact that arrow functions in ES 2015, if they only have one line, it automatically returns it. So we now have a really basic render function that just returns a header. And so now if we want to use this component inside of our main component, we can import it in. So we'll import header from, not dot slash, components and header. And now right in the place where this header was, we'll now use that component. Let's do it like that. Cool. And it should work exactly the same way, but now we've kind of like encapsulated the logic of the header into another component. One thing to note, your custom components in React actually need to begin with a capital letter. So when React is seeing your code in JSX, anytime it sees a lowercase, it actually interprets that as just like a regular DOM element. So your custom components actually need to have capital letters. So we'll do the same thing with footer. Let's create a new file in components called footer.js, React functional component export, cool. And we'll take this footer and throw it in that component. And now we'll import it in. So we have that. I'm gonna try this fancy thing that's in VS Code. If you type something that doesn't exist, boom, automatic import. Cool, right? So now our footer's there. So we've broken it up into components, and you'll see me do this as I build out the other things in the app. We'll have a component for the dogs page, a component for the list, a component for each individual thing in the list. So that's our basic layout. Now let's set up React Router. So right now we have this basic app, but what we want and what you've seen is like in this blank spot right here is where the different components will live. This is where we're going to list all the dogs. This is where we'll list each individual dog. So let's set up React Router for that. The React Router website is here. Really good documentation, like really good examples. It's good, but it's also a lot. So if you're a beginner, it's kind of hard to parse, but I will guide you there. First thing, let's install React Router DOM. And I guess the other thing about React Router, and you saw it on the homepage, it supports pretty much any environment that React runs in. So you have React Router for the web, React Router for React Native, anywhere else. And specifically, because we're using it on the web, we're using React Router DOM. Cool. So we have it, now we need to use it. So if we go back to our index.js, which is where everything lives and everything is set up, we will import the browser router from React Router DOM. And there are a few different routers built into React Router DOM. The browser router is one that uses the HTML5 history API, so there's no like hash in the URL. It's just like clean URLs. There's also hash router, but typically what you see people do is import browser router as router. So you just alias it to the name router, but it is a browser router. And then you wrap your app in the router component. So here we'll have router, and inside of it, the app will live. And now, that doesn't do anything on our page, but our app is now available to use routing. This is the router itself is using like the context and provider API, which I may have time to show, I may not, but that's essentially what's happening. Because everything lives inside of this, it has access to router stuffs. Okay, and now let's create a component that will hold all of our routes. So in components, let's create a new file. I'm gonna call this routes.js, React functional component export. And for this, we're going to be using a component called switch that's from React Router DOM. So we're going to import switch from React Router DOM. And the way this works is like a switch you're used to in programming. So basically, this lives here. All of your routes will live inside of it, and it will decide which route to show based on what matches in the URL. So we have our switch. And I think one thing I'll do is just add like a not found route. So anytime someone types a URL that doesn't exist, it'll show like a not found page. So the way you do that is you bring in router, and sorry, not router, route. And inside of our switch, we use the route component. So we have route. And then this accepts a few props. The first one would be path. So what should the path be when this route loads? And there's also component. And this is what component should I show when that path matches. So for the not found route, I'm just going to say star. So you can use regular expressions in here. This says if the URL is anything, let's show this component. And then I'm going to define a component called not found. Let's do that in here. Not found.js. And this will be very simple. Just let's do like an h2 not found. So we have the component, now we'll import it over here, so this makes sense. So we'll import the not found component from not found. Cool. And now we need to take this routes component that we created and put it on our actual app component, because we haven't done that yet. So basically, we're going to take this component and put it right here inside of the main. So what I want to do is just say my routes go right there. And we should see not found. Cool. So we have basically when the app loads, it looks at the URL, which is currently /, and that matches against star, so it loads the not found component. Awesome. We have routing set up. Now, on to the actual coding of the thing. As a lonely dog, I want to see a list of all the dogs that are available so that I can see my dating options.
We wrote actual stories.
Yes, there are user stories associated with this. Cool. The first thing I'll do is create what we'll call a container, and this is going to contain all the logic for that dogs page. So in the source directory, I'm going to create a new folder and call it containers, and you'll see the difference between what we call like a pure function component or a stateless functional component versus a container component. So we'll create a new file in here. Let's call this the dogs page.js. React component, I think. Cool. So I have this class component called dogs page. Again, let's just do a very simple render function just to make sure that it's working. The dogs page. And now that I have this component, I want to set up a route that says when the URL is / like the home page, it should show this component. So in our routes component, we will import in the dogs page. And then we need to add a new route. So the path I want here is just to be /, and the component will be dogs page. This should work. Dogs page, cool. But one thing I want to do is put the prop on here called exact, and that's mainly because these will match even if the beginning of the URL starts with slash. So later on, I'll have other URLs that have slash. So by putting exact here, the URL has to be exactly slash to be able to load the dogs page. Cool. So dogs page is loaded. Where are we at? Let's set up state. So I talked about this is a container component. Container components have state. So we'll have some state here, and the state for the dogs page needs some dogs, and I'll say initially it's null because we're going to have to get those from an API. So when the app loads up, there are no dogs, and we can actually use that in the render function here. So the way you access things on your state inside of like any function in your component is this.state. Whatever thing you want. So I'm actually going to destructure this. So I want to grab the dogs from this.state, and then we'll do a ternary. We'll say if dogs exists, meaning it's not null, we'll say this is the dog page. Otherwise, we'll show like a loading message. Okay, so initially, dogs are null, so we see the loading message. But we're going to have to add some code that will update dogs, so that way it will eventually show them. I think I had in here, I was going to do like a loading component. How am I doing on time? Not good on time, so let's keep going. So the next thing is we actually want to call the API. So in a component, to actually call the API, you want to do this in the component did mount. So there are various lifecycle methods in React. This one runs after the component's been added to the page, and now you're ready and able to modify state. So what I'll do is we'll create like a separate file where we can call the API. So I'll get back some result, and I want to await something like get dogs. And then we'll just log the result there. And this needs to be an async function, and I need a get dogs function. So what I'll do is in the source file folder, I'll create a new file and call it api.js. In here, I need to export a function called get dogs. And this will actually reach out to the API. So we're going to get back the response from awaiting fetch to some API URL. And then we're going to return that response parsed as JSON. And this needs to be an async function. We need our API URL. That's barkwire-api.now.sh/dogs. Cool. So we have this function in this file that will actually reach out to the API and get the dogs. Now we want to call this function in our component and put them on state. So in here, now we can actually import get dogs. So I'll import get dogs from the API file. And we should see some dogs. Cool. So when the component mounts, it makes the API request, and now it's logging those dogs out to the console. So now we actually want to show those inside of our component. So let's set state. So right now, dogs are null, but what we want to do is we want to take that array that we just got back and put it on state. So for this, you use set state. And this is basically a way of telling React, hey, we just got something, we're trying to put it on state. We'll put it on state, that will rerun the render function, and then whatever changes based on what you needed will actually show up. And actually, let's destructure this. Let's grab the dogs, and then we'll just set dogs on state. So now it should say dogs page, because that data is actually existing under the hood on state. Cool. So let's actually show the stuffs. So in our render function, instead of just saying dogs page, we'll have like a UL. And we could create a dogs list component. Not going to do that just yet, but what I do want to do is actually like show something on the page for each dog. So now that I have dogs in my render function, we'll just map over it. So I'll say dogs.map. This will give me each dog, and I want to show a list item for every dog. Not that. So we'll have a list item, and inside of here, I'll just show dog.name. So inside of JSX, if you ever want to access like a variable, you just use curly braces, and we're accessing that dog variable from the map. And so now we should see the dog names. Cool. But I get an error. It's telling me each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. So this has to do with the fact that React is using the virtual DOM, and because there are multiple elements here, we need to let React know how do we differentiate between these elements. So we have to give them a key, very similar to Vue.js. And by giving them a key, it can keep track of them and know when something changes or updates and how to update or change any given one. So that should get rid of that error. Awesome. Now, let's create a dog list component. So basically what I want to do is take this code here and put it in its own component called dog list. So in components, create a new file, call this doglist.js. This is going to be another functional component. And I'll basically just take this code right here, pull it into the dog list as my render function. But now, we actually need to get dogs into this component. And so this is known as props. And what we can do is, we'll destructure it. Essentially, this function gets a parameter called props, and you have access to props.dogs, but we destructure it to grab off dogs, so that way we can actually show it. So now to pass that data down, we need to bring in the dog list component here. And props are just specified like attributes on HTML. So I want to say dogs is equal to dogs. So now we're passing down dogs to that component. And can I import it? Cool. So everything breaks. Dogs.map is not a function. Oh, not dog list, dogs. There we go, cool. So it still works, but now we're passing it down to that component. I was going to do prop type validation. I don't think I have time for that. Oh, I can copy and paste it. Let's do that. Cool. So similar to Vue.js, this is basically a way of validating what props you're passing down to the component. So this is saying that this list needs to have a prop called dogs. It's going to be an array, and each element in that array must have these properties. The thing is, prop types used to be built into React, but that's now deprecated. You need a separate library called prop types. And then once that installs, we should be able to import prop types from prop-types. Okay, cool. Now we actually want to show the dog info. Thank you, pass CJ. We can just copy and paste this. So basically, right here inside of the list item is where we can show all of that info. So this will be very similar to what you saw Kyle do a little bit ago. But now that we have each individual dog in the map, we have its ID, we have its name, its URL, its caption, its description, and then you'll notice we're wrapping this in a link. So, and actually, let me do this. Let's put the link outside of the section. Whoa, 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 oh no. Things have gone horribly wrong. There we go, cool. So the idea is when we click on a dog, that will actually take us to the dogs page. But link comes from React Router DOM, so we'll need to import that as well. So import link from React Router DOM. And, hey, we got some dogs, cool. Thank you, thank you. That was a lot of setup, but we got there, a lot of components. And now we're on to the next story. I think I was going to deploy, I'm not going to deploy. Let's keep going. As a lonely dog, I want to be able to link to a specific dog. So we already set up that link, but because there's no route that exists, it should say not found, right? Because the URL changes to be dog/1. Okay, so one thing I'll also do is let's make this header actually link to the home page. So in our header component, let's add a link here. And we'll put Barkwire inside of it. We need to import link from React Router DOM. And we specify 2. So when you click this, go to the home page. Cool, so now if I click this, back to the home page, but now we need to implement the single dogs route. So first thing, let's create a dog page container. Yeah, we will have prop types. I think I can copy and paste them. And for now, let's just show an H1, should say dog page. Then we need to set up a route for this page. So in our routes, we'll add that, be very similar. and we need another route, and this will be /dogs/some ID. So this is a route param where we'll have access to whatever ID is in the URL. So now we should see dog page. Whichever one we click on, it just says dog page. Now we want to show that actual information. Cool. So let's set up state here. So the state for this component is dog. And initially it's null because there is no dog. And we can do a very similar thing in our render function. So let's grab the dog from state. This dot state. And we'll have another ternary. So if the dog exists, then show an h1, hi. And if it doesn't, we'll show an h1 that just says loading. Cool, so we should see loading because we haven't gotten it from the API yet. Cool. So now, very similar to how we did in the other component, we're going to call the API in our component did mount. So here we'll do component did mount. We'll need to grab the dog from awaiting something like get dog, and we need to pass in some ID. Not get dogs, get dog, we'll have to create it. And before we can do that, the way we get the ID from the URL here is using props. So because we're using React Router and because we wrapped our entire app in this provider, every component has access to the current params in the URL. So what we want to do is we want to grab the ID from this.props.match.params. And if we just log it out, we should now see the ID of every page that we click on. So we see 2, we see like 3. So whatever is here, which we specified as ID in our routes, we actually get access to there. Cool. And now we can actually send that ID off to the API to get that individual dog. So in our API, very similar function, but singular. It accepts an ID, it calls the API, and it just needs to do /that given ID. Cool. And now if we log out the dog, and we'll also need to make this an async function, we should see the dog on the page. So there is the dog with ID 3. Now we just need to set it on state. So we'll do this.setState. We'll pass in the dog that we just got back from the API, and now we should see hi. So now we actually want to show the information about the dog. So we'll pull that into a separate component. And one thing I'll do is add prop types. You'll notice it's yelling at me right now, like, hey, you're accessing this stuff from props. I don't know what that is. And I can just tell it that match is an object that has an object inside of it, and I'm expecting ID to be there, so that will go away. And then let's actually extract that dog component. So right here is where I was showing the dog. I want to move this into another component, so it's just like dog, and I can pass down the dog like this. So this was our listing page, but now once I bring it into another component, I can reuse it on the dog page. So we'll have this. We'll have our dog here. It's going to do this. We need to bring it in from props. And, bring in dog from props. I believe I have some prop types that I can copy, maybe? Well, I'm not gonna do it. Okay, so now that we have the dog component, we need to make sure we import it into dog list, so that still works. So we're going to import dog from components / wait, where am I? Cool, so the dog list, this should still work, but now that this is in a component, all we have to do is bring it into this, this component and it should just work. So on the dog page, we'll import the dog component, and right here, we want to show dog, and we'll say dog is equal to dog, and there it is, cool. So, all the dogs, each one you can click on, it loads that component, and those things load up. Awesome. That's our app. I think I went way over on time. I went a few minutes over on time, but I will mention all this stuff is in the GitHub repo, and I may do a stream soon where like I add this stuff onto it. So using the React Context API to basically extract all of our state up into a provider and all of our functions. It's very similar to Redux if you've ever worked with that, but it's now like built into React. Cool. Links and plugs, all the code is here, git.io/react-barkwire. If you didn't attend last year, last year I built an MVC like mini framework from scratch. So if you just search front-end face-off vanilla.js MVC, it's a really fun time, so check out that video. Subscribe on YouTube, Coding Garden with CJ. I go live multiple days a week. Lots of cool stuff there. And I am giving a talk with Marlena at Denver Startup Week on the 26th. We're doing a talk called Prototyping Overnight with Vue.js. So we're going to talk about all the Vue ecosystem, all of the cool plugins and things that are available to you to make really cool prototypes and usable prototypes and things that you can work on and make better and like more than just prototypes in that talk. So check that out as well. Thank you very much.
All right, we have. Oh, you turn it off? Okay, we have one last framework left, but I can promise you it's going to be a little bit less code than the last two frameworks. So, I would like to first, before I introduce you to Mavo, or Mavo, I don't actually know how it's pronounced yet, because I haven't ever seen any videos or anything talking about it. I'm going to introduce myself. So in case you don't know me, I'm Brooks. I'm the organizer of this meetup, but I'm also a software developer at Apto. I also have a live streaming channel. Instead of YouTube, I live stream on Twitch and then archive those videos to YouTube. I usually stream in the morning before work around 7 a.m. Mountain Time. And I've worked in the IT industry, doing systems administration and programming for over 10 years. 8 of those years was at NASA. So, it's been a very interesting career to get me to this point, but it's so fun learning new things and growing and seeing the industry grow along with it. So, let's talk about what Mavo is. It was created by Leah Veru in 2017. Who has heard of Leah Veru? One person, one CSS geek in the house. No, okay, fine. Leah is the author of, I believe, CSS Tricks or Secrets. It's a really awesome book that shows how you can replace like 50 lines of CSS with one, and that it's accepted by every browser and nobody knows about it. But what's interesting is that she wanted to create a completely different type of framework, one that's not component-based, but one that has as little JavaScript in it, at least from the the coder's end, as possible. So the focus is on HTML and CSS. In fact, today we're going to write 0 JavaScript. I know, we're going to keep it on the back end. Okay, so let's build this out. So I have here a basic indexed HTML page. So what I want to do, I brought in the CSS that we created for the shared app. We're going to have a little bit of custom CSS to add on to that because this framework is all about that. So I should also bring my checklist out that I wrote for myself. Let's create our boilerplate HTML. And we'll call this Barkwire Mavo. And we're going to want to bring in a few different one JavaScript file, but it's not going to be our own. Instead of main.js, let's bring in Mavo.js. I already brought this down. It's around 8,000 lines long, which brings about 40K when you minify it and send it up to the client. So Mavo.js. We're also going to want to bring in Mavo.css because being a framework, it has a little bit of front-end CSS for us too. So let's bring that up before this. Link, href, Mavo.css. And before I forget, I'm going to bring in our custom CSS that's a completely empty file right now. So, and I want to override all of this. Link, what did I call it? Custom.css. And that's kind of going to be it. So let's make sure that things are running. We're going to do an h1 hello world. We'll save this. Come on over to, where is it? Here it is, our app. Hit refresh, and there's our hello world. Now, the reason why our h1 turned into nothing is because Kyle, when he wrote the CSS, reset everything. So,
You goddamn right I did.
luckily, I'm not going to have to write very much CSS for this, so let's just go ahead and sort of like create a static dog in here, and then we'll use Mavo to sort of add things in. So let's bring in, I actually have some copy and paste stuff here. I want to bring in the header and footer. This is the boring stuff, so nobody cares that we're copying and pasting this header and footer. So save it, here's a header and footer. It's exactly the same as everybody else, except I didn't have to go through several minutes of configuration to get it on a page. Now, the stuff in between, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. So we're going to start with a UL tag, and we're going to give it a class of dogs. And inside of here, we're going to have an li tag. We'll just do a single one right now, and we'll use Mavo to fill in the rest of them from the server. We're going to have our href tag, but I'm just going to send it to hash for right now because we'll deal with that later. And then we'll have a section. And I forgot that this has a class of dog listing. And inside of this section is going to be a h3 name. And so let's just call this dog name. And then down below that, we have a new section. And inside of the section, we have figure. By the way, if anybody wants to know who created this initial setup, I believe it was Kyle who set up the HTML2. Inside a figure, we're going to have our image. Now, we have this image source. I don't really have a good source to test this out, so I'm going to bring in a place kitten. Because why not use a place kitten for a eventual dog dating app, right? And for alt, we'll just say this is a dog name. Because that totally makes sense in this context right now. Below our image, we're going to have a fig caption. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't have autocomplete from Emmet, so I have to do fig caption here. And then just put in, dog description. And then below the figure, we're going to have a p tag, which is going to be the full, actually, this is not the dog description, this is the dog caption. And this is the dog description. And was there anything else? No. Okay. So let's save, and let's see what we got. Well, we've got this. Now, of course, nothing's happening. It's not loading in the real data, and we have a kitty cat instead of a dog, but we sort of got our initial layout. So now that we have that, let's start seeing about bringing in Mavo and actually letting it work its magic. So Mavo feels to me like it was a little bit, some of the ideas of Mavo was brought by the initial Angular 1. We can see that with like Mavo app to initialize the app, and then we give it a name. So we're going to call this barkwire. And that initializes it. At this point in time, I could now put in, let's say I just do 1 + 2. It's going to be the exact same thing as with Angular, except instead of the double curly braces, it's single square brackets. And we have 3 right there. So we know that it's included and it's working properly. So let's actually see what we can do to bring in some data. Now Mavo, because we're not going to use any JavaScript in here, it has some interesting properties that we can use. So we're going to do mv source equals, and we're going to grab the API. Now this is the full API all the way to including dogs. I'm just going to put this in here. Now, it's not really going to show anything for us yet. So let's go ahead and tell this li here, we want this to repeat. So mv multiple, and we need to tell it what property on the object to listen to that the array is on. So it's property equals dogs. We'll hit save. And now we have a bunch of dogs on the screen. Well, not really, we have a bunch of cats. But it's sort of repeating over those. So how do we actually now extract the data and put it into the DOM? Well, we're going to use a combination of property and those single brackets. So, okay, we this barkwire is fine, UL class dogs, that's fine. We'll come into here, this is the first one. H3 class dog name, we're going to do property equals name. I'm going to hit save. And the name just shows up. Notice also that it showed the dog name first for just a half second while it made the GET request to go get the data. So that's how we can have sort of predefined data set up there so you can see something while it's loading the data. All right, well, let's do the rest here. So we have our section, figure, image source. Well, this needs to change. This is going to become image, what is it? Image source? No. Image URL. And alt is just going to become name. So we have the choice. We can use property when we want it to get injected into the tag. But if we just need to use it directly, we use the single square brackets. We could use these single square brackets right here. So we can use image caption right here. Also, this would be helpful if I spelled this correctly. Okay, figure, dog description. Let's do property equals description. Let's save. Let's see what we got. Now, we got image caption here. That's because that's not actually the real one that it's supposed to be. So what did I do wrong? How's it supposed to be spelled?
Brackets.
Oh yeah, I did put brackets around it. Well, that's silly. And now we got those. So everything is in here the way we want it to be. So now the next thing that we're missing is the single page app part of it. We want to be able to click on one of them without refreshing the screen, only show the one we want to see. So we're gonna do a little bit of magic here. This ahref, we're gonna change this and say, okay, we want to go to pound dogs square bracket ID. So we have an ID property off of the data that's coming in, and so this is gonna make it. So when I click on these, up in the URL, which I can't really zoom in there because the URL doesn't zoom in, but now it says dogs 1, dogs 2, dogs 3. Mavo has a really interesting idea where if I use the classic anchor tag system, how many of you remember the anchor tag system from way back in the day? Mavo uses that. So I'm going to say ID equals pound dogs ID. Now, magically, this is not going to do anything for me. Like, it's not going to just suddenly show only one thing. But if I open up the DevTools and I click on one of these, let's click on the second one. We're going to see, I don't think did I not, I saved. Let's hit refresh. Where's the class? Class is not in there. Did I not use, oh yeah, I need double quotes. All right. Oh, it's not, do I need it? This is the part that I always get, it always sort of gets a little bit in here. Let's try one more thing to get it to go in. So we have ID, dogs ID. We have the href, dogs of ID coming in here. We know that it's hitting this dogs ID. Let's make sure that if I scroll way in here and I click on the second one, oh no, so notice that it's not jumping down so that that anchor system isn't working properly. So in my li, I have this ID dogs of ID, and this is href dogs of ID. In here, let's investigate. In the ul li, we have ID dogs 1, dogs 2, dogs 3. That seems to be working fine. Let me make sure. It was working for me. Okay, so I'm going to have to switch over to my emergency solution one. So localhost 3000/solution.html. So now this is suddenly working, but let me show you what's going on here. When I clicked on it, it changed. Oh, did I do a /href ID? No, it should be fine there. But when I clicked on it, it added a class into HTML class here. I want to zoom in on here. MV target within. So it finds whichever one I clicked on, and it reads the DOM tree from the top, HTML, and injects MV target within all the way down until the A tag that was in it. That allows us to come in to the CSS, and we can now write our custom CSS to only show the things that we want to see. So we want to select the body. When it has the MV target within class, and then anything inside of there that is an LI tag. Now we want to make sure that we get everything that does not have the class MV target within. Now this was a fun endeavor when I was going through this. There is a not function for CSS, which allows me to select everything that does not have .mv target within. We save this, and then this just works, and we get how do I get, okay, there we go. We get the interaction that we want. We click on one, and it shows the one we want. Then we can come back, and it shows them all, because we clicked out of it, and the MV target within got removed from everything. And that is Mavo. It basically allows us to really quickly write what we want out, only using HTML and CSS. Now, if there's anything in there that just doesn't get handled properly, then that's where Mavo allows us to write custom JavaScript plugins. But that's outside of the scope of this, this presentation. So that's what I've got. That is Mavo.
Q&A?
Yeah, let's do some Q&A.
Get the other mic.
Also, if you're on the stream, feel free to ask questions at this time.
I'm gonna have to talk you people. I won't want beer.
Questions?
Yeah, softball.
Go for it.
The export default statement of a view component, I noticed Kyle didn't use the name property once. What is that name property for?
Nobody knows. So the company we work at, the standard is to include the name property. I never do. It makes no difference. I think it helps primarily with errors and that kind of thing, but it's just clutter to me. I never include it. It doesn't break anything.
How much time did you each do for your individual projects?
So for mine, like, by the way, it helps that the three of us literally made this exact same map last year. So like, there was a little bit of acceleration on that. The one that you guys saw tonight for me was the 5th time that I had made that app. I just put Arrested Development on in the background and just burned through it a couple times because I had not seen Barkwire in here. So that was me. CJ?
Wait, what was the question?
How much prep time for tonight?
I started this morning.
For me, like part of it was finding out what framework I wanted to do. I chose like the most interesting, weird framework I could find. And after that, it was reading the documentations, figuring out how to only get one. I thought it was just black magic at first until I realized it was just CSS.
Other questions?
Other questions?
So, Mavo, are you just copying the files and putting them into your folder? Or, like I noticed for yours, there's no install, there's no in yarn, so are you really just need that CSS and the JS file and then everything else works?
Yeah, so the question is, with Mavo, do you really just need the JavaScript and CSS files to get going? And the answer is yeah. It's a super, super lightweight framework. It's around 44K when setting up, when it's minimized in the end. So, like there's not, I was using Light Server to serve it up. Otherwise, there's no CLI for it.
Question in the chat from me too, in regards to Mavo. So is it essentially just hiding the elements instead of replacing the content like an actual spa routing does?
Yes, absolutely. So it's basically like way back in the days when we were initially like making our own frameworks with jQuery. That's kind of what Mavo is doing for us behind the scenes, except we're just writing a CSS to handle it, and there's a lot less code to make that work.
Leanne.
Is Mavo only developed by one developers?
The question is Mavo developed by only one developer? And I haven't looked too much into it, but from what I understand, Mavo is developed by Leah Varu and some other developers through the MIT CSAIL division.
Also, I didn't have my hand up during that who is Leah Varu thing. CSS Secrets is the best fucking book on CSS I've ever read. Especially if I'm an advanced developer, CSS beneath me, or CSS is stupid. Read that book. There's a lot to it. It's very logical, and you will understand so much more about how CSS works in that book. It is mind-blowingly good.
Cool. I have a question for the audience. So seeing what you saw tonight, which framework would you go home and use next? Vue, raise your hand. Cool. React, raise your hand. And Mavo? I won! There's a question in the back.
Mine's Alex. I have a startup, and we're building a website and a system that allows people to do Bitcoin accounting and tax preparation. And I'm using Drupal 8 on the back end because obviously they're familiar with Drupal CMS, but I want to go possibly headless or just put some React components into it. Does anyone have experience integrating React with Drupal or another non-JS CMS?
So for people watching, so there's a question about, so there's some cryptocurrency stuff happening with Drupal on the back end, but you want some custom components to essentially add to Drupal to be able to like integrate with that. I've never done that.
I haven't either, but the closest thing to what you're talking about that I am very familiar with is on the back end, Laravel uses, like, that is a very tight partnership with you. Use basically a first-class citizen in Laravel apps. And so you can do a lot of like very CMS-y kinds of things in that and still get the full power of like a Vue SPA. As far as I know of, that's probably the best you're going to get in like that kind of heavyweight back-end CMS with a really modern SPA feel.
Question from the stream for React: is prop type a poor man's TypeScript?
In a way, so I was moving so fast I didn't get to demonstrate it. I don't think we ever saw one of the errors, but basically, once you define those prop types, it says this component must have props that have this shape or have this specific type. And if you ever try to use that component and pass down a prop that doesn't match that, you'll get a compile time error. So it's very similar to TypeScript. And that's the main reason you would add the prop types. Like you're working on a team, you develop a component for someone, and someone else needs to know like what are the props I need to pass down. Prop types help you with that, definitely.
I think more generally, a lot of this kind of stuff is like the maturing of the JS ecosystem. Like this shit's existed in the back end forever. But like that kind of, like essentially defining interfaces, that's relatively new in the JS world. And that's kind of how I think of it. What is the interface for this component? What does it need? What should I throw an error if it doesn't get? And so anytime you have like prop types or like the prop type verification in Vue, like all those things are sort of getting at that, like essentially interfaces.
So my response to that would be that TypeScript is compile time and prop types is runtime, right? Because prop types are still there when your compile step has executed.
Yes.
Whereas types annotations in TypeScript would evaporate.
Agreed. And for anybody in the stream who didn't hear that, the point was that things like prop types, props in Vue, those are runtime versus types, which are compile time. Other questions?
I got one. Vue is supposed to be like super powerful for prototyping and super fast. Mavo seemed incredibly fast. I guess my question is to Brooks, like where would Mavo fall short versus Vue?
Where I see Mavo falling short is the lack of component system. So you can foresee that I'm going to be writing all the HTML inside of that one file that I want displayed on a single page. Now, MDN does show that there is an HTML native import for browsers with exactly 0 browsers supporting it right now. So it's going to be quite a few years before that's something we can do. Now, if I wanted to, I could probably write some plugins for Mavo, which would do GET requests to get raw HTML and then inject those into the DOM and then be able to use them. So it's actually possible to write it, but natively, if I just want to pull it out and just start going with it, no. I believe that Mavo is really best for small, simple, single-page apps, not full, huge apps.
And like, I would also push back on the like use for prototyping thing, and we're got the exact same thing. It's like, with that much boilerplate, it's gotta be fat and heavy and like that sort of shit. Like, you wanna use that for a real app. You wanna use something like React to really kind of cut out all the itself fat. Like, I think that is such a bullshit argument. Just because it has boilerplate or under the hood magic or any of those kinds of things, I don't think that means it's just for prototyping or something like that, and then you use something way closer to the hood or no framework at all, just vanilla or something for your real app. Because one of the advantages you get out of having the full ecosystem like that is that this was definitely the case with Ember apps. It's honestly probably the case with UX also. Like, without changing any of your code, if you just run the update, your app gets faster over time because there's other people working on optimizing it. Like, that is a massive benefit to not like rolling your own everything. And so just because there is a lot of magic in it, I don't think means that it's only a prototyping tool. But that's a really common perception of those things.
If you're building a medium-sized app today, what framework would you personally choose?
What was the question?
The question was, if you were building a medium-sized app today, what would you personally choose? And for myself, and why? My initial response would have been Ember. Problem is that like one of the benefits to Ember previously was like every Ember app looks exactly the same. So if I hire an Ember developer, they know what this looks like. Ember developers are very short supply now. So if I need to bring other people to work on it, like honestly, Vue is probably what I would roll with. That's what I work with in my day-to-day life. That's what I do in all my personal projects now. Like that's what would answer for me.
For me, I sort of see it on like two different sides. There's two different sides. Is this an app for a company I'm working for, where I'm going to have like, lots of users on it, or is this a personal project app, which I'm also doing like for fun? If it's a personal project app for fun, I would probably either try to figure out how to use Mavo or learn Vue, because those are going to be fun and really important to me. React is the one that I would pull out for like the corporate side, because the number of developers that I can hire to work with me, and also just the amount of JavaScript code and my familiarity.
Yes, so I guess we're talking about a medium-sized app. With something like Vue.js, so Vue.js is my favorite framework. Like I started using it probably close to 2 years ago, and I like it because, it works for me because I was actually familiar with Angular 1x, and it does a lot of similar things just in terms of like the syntax and how things work together. It definitely, people have called it kind of like the middle ground between React and Angular, but I think that could be one of the downfalls of if you have a whole new team that's never used Vue.js before, there's like a domain-specific language that they have to learn in terms of like the attributes and like how to put it together. Whereas if you're using something like React, you can take someone that knows JavaScript really well and they can be productive almost right away without really having to learn all the specifics of Vue.js. I mean, you kind of saw it in the app I did tonight. It's just you're just importing and exporting things, and it's a whole lot of JavaScript. So I think it depends on the team. Personally, I choose Vue.js because I like it, but that is like one of the downfalls.
Just one more tag to that. So when I was looking for work recently, and I was doing Code Challenge, and it was a React Code Challenge. I had literally never written a React component in my life, but like, I'm pretty good at JavaScript. And like, 7 hours, I had their Code Challenge done. So like, that is a benefit to React, is that if you know JavaScript, you can like fake your way through React just fine. I will also say that it was a miserable 7 hours, and I hated my code, and I think that matters. Like, that has an impact on like your day-to-day life as a developer, right? But from a learnability standpoint, I was also able to pick up Vue very quickly, but that's because like of my heavy background in Ember. There's a lot of like opinionated kind of things I was able to pull in from that. If I didn't have that background, that would have been a much steeper learning curve than React was.
One last question. If Angular 6 was in this lineup, I mean, based on your experiences with that, how do you think it would have fit into this battle?
So I did Angular 1x for like 3 or 4 years professionally, and then only slightly did like Angular 2 when it was first coming out. So I think the main thing about something like Angular is it's really good for big production apps and big teams, because it has like, especially like the latest Angular, it's like very opinionated. They have their CLI tool that just generates so much stuff. It's using TypeScript, so like working on a team, you have your type annotations, so it's easier to like use components that other people use, that kind of thing. I feel like it's really a whole different beast. I think of all the things we showed today, it probably has the most opinions, and like probably like when it generates the app, it has just most of the things in it. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but.
I'd say one big difference you might notice is that Angular probably would have taken the longest of them all if it was here to write.
So I know a little bit of Angular 1X also, like, when single-page apps were first becoming a thing, like everybody else went, Google's making a framework, oh, I gotta check this out. And like, I didn't, like I was framework shopping at the time, like for whatever reason, it just didn't super rock with me at the time. And like, that's around the time I found Ember. Angular 2 Plus is like literally a different framework. It has nothing to do with that original style. And I think that's kind of unfortunate because it's a good framework, especially for that like more opinionated style. But I think it carries a lot of the baggage of 1X. Because 1X was immensely popular. And when you're popular, you become a default. And default shit attracts default developers, default companies, people who just go with whatever's most popular. And like, PHP suffered this, Java suffered this. Anything that's super popular, you end up with a bunch of shit. Bad tutorials, bad apps, and like that ends up getting an unearned bad reputation for the language or framework or whatever. And like, I think that Angular 2 Plus kind of has that now. A good example of this would be Microsoft. Edge is a good browser. Edge is like, okay. Secret. But they will never ship the legacy of IE. And IE is, you know, a travesty. I have to support IE 11 in my job. I sent any like condolences after the talk. But like, Edge doesn't have any of that shit. But like, you can't get somebody to give it a shot. People will use Brave before they'll use Edge. And so I feel like modern Angular is kind of in the same boat.
Just like a small, I mean, so just in terms of like, so working in Angular 1X, back then there weren't a lot of opinions coming from the framework itself. So like, there's like the John Papa style guide, and if a team was using that, then it was like a decent app you could expect where things were. But it was really easy to do things wrong. But I think that's what has changed in the latest version of Angular, because it's a lot more opinionated, and it's harder to do things the wrong way because they've tried so hard to like standardize the docs and like standardize how everything fits together. So. Cool.
All right, well, that was our long meetup, but it's been awesome doing this, and awesome that you guys came here and watched this. Thank you so much. We'll be cleaning up here, but feel free to come up and ask questions in person. So.
How late am I for this show?
It's 8:52.
Oh, fine. Should have started 52 minutes ago. There's